Hey, welcome to Being Creative. My name is Rick Leaf, as you know, and I'm the host of this show. In today's episode, it's all about questions. Yeah, uncomfortable questions, curious questions, panic-producing questions. I don't know, maybe all of those things, or none of those things. The response, well, it's not really my business. The response is up to you. As far as I'm concerned, I have nothing to do with it. But whatever happens from here on in, I want you to know I'm glad you're here. All right. I don't think anything produces growth and gratitude like laying it on the line. I'm working on this documentary, lay it on the line, discovering dodgeball. But what's really inspired me about the whole thing was this idea of whether you're an artist or an athlete, what really inspires me and gets me interested in talking to other people is those people who lay it on the line. You take your dreams, your ideas, your aspirations, whatever you want to call them, and you lay them on the line. You really go for it. And we all share disappointment and discouragement and defeat in our stories. You can't live a day in this life without one or all of those things at some point. So that's not weird. What's weird is when you talk to some of us and we're telling stories of disappointment and discouragement and defeat with an emotional heat that you'd swear whatever they're talking about just happened on Tuesday. And we're barely at the weekend. But then you find out that what they're talking about happened 10, 20, even 30 years ago. So why? Why the heat? Why the emotion about something that happened so long ago when it's something so common, this disappointment, discouragement, and defeat? Like, why? Why is it like that for some and not for all? That's what I want to ask you. I want to ask these questions. So, if you don't know me super well, you don't know that I love theories. I love coming up with workable theories that I can test and try and see whether they pan out. So my theory in this little journey of why some people get so stuck in a rut that they're talking about the same thing as if it just happened decades after it's long gone and everybody's forgotten except for them. This whole idea of what's living rent-free in your head. My theory is because that individual hasn't laid it on the line again and again and again. Set themselves up for a new wave of disappointment, a new wave of discouragement, a whole new host of defeats, but also setting themselves up for success and the confidence that comes from success and the joy that comes from doing what you love, from laying it on the line. And if you don't do that, if any of us don't do that, then you're stuck. And you get stuck in that moment and there's nothing to describe or to talk about or to ruminate about, but the circumstances that surround that initial experience. Like, is it just me? Have you seen this? Have you felt this yourself? Like, as a kid, I look back over my story and I was a quitter. Embarrassingly so. I quit everything. I gave up. I cried all the time. I whined a lot. And when I look back, it was because life seemed unfair to me. It was too hard. It felt like the deck was stacked against me. But was it? Or was it just life? Was it just a Tuesday afternoon in some small corner of the world that swallowed me whole because I thought every moment of every day was going to be like the weekend? What makes you dream? What makes you dream? Literally. Like, is it the memes and the Instagram influencers and the celebrities and the slam poets that are all screaming at the moon in an artistic way? Is that what makes you dream? Somebody who puts, emotion and thought into words with some, nice music or some inspiring score or some filter. Is that what makes you take that step? Or is that what makes you dream of taking the step while you stay in place? Because I think it comes down to making dreams a verb. I mean, this is what I've always loved about artists and the communities that I get to spin around in. Artists can't help themselves. The artists that I know, the artists that I'm describing right now, these are the people they have to create, and they love to create, and somehow sharing what they write and create with others completes the love of the thing itself. So they put on shows and concerts, and they take to the stage or to the street. They can't help themselves. And increasingly in this world, people are too busy or too preoccupied to pay attention or maybe even notice. And if they do, they love to comment on, oh, it must be hard to be a starving artist. But who's starving? Like, that actively bugs me, that description. But I've taken that extra step instead of going like, oh, you're like describing me, or you're describing like this, the choices that I've made and the life I've chosen to live, as if I'm impoverished in some way, because I'm seriously not starving. But you're equating this with this idea that the choices that I've made to live this authentic life that pursues laying it on the line, the next story, the next song, the next idea, the next show, the next book or story or podcast or video or whatever, that somehow that pursuit leaves a person starving and impoverished. And why? Because we're not chasing some alternate set of values that is ultimately only evaluated in the success or failure based on how much money you make. And this is maybe the thing where I'm learning in my own journey. I was thinking today about how, my 20s, I think 20s are awesome. You're old enough, hopefully you start making enough money that you don't need your parents to be involved. You have that financial independence that lets you move out and do your own thing, hopefully, because that's so much fun. And when my kids were moving out, I was like, you're going to love it. Even if you're eating mac and cheese and Ichiban noodles and toast for supper, even if your place is filthy and dirty, you're gonna love coming home and be like, this is my house, this is my apartment, this is my space. I loved that. And I loved the fact that in the 20s, nobody really expects you to have your, crap together. You can be questioning, you can be quitting jobs and trying something else. You can be going back to school or stopping school to work for a bit. No matter what you do, people are pretty accommodating to be like, yeah, you're just trying to figure it out, man. In your 30s, people start, the thing, starts figuring out, some people start figuring it out and they kind of get it. And other people are still asking those questions. It becomes a little bit more awkward. I think it was around the end of my 30s where I was like moving into the 40s, that kind of looming birthday. I remember it was terrible. I remember just thinking, ugh, like, it seemed like life was over in 40s. Kind of felt like that life's going to be over. I haven't figured anything out. None of those dreams that I was working on seemed to have, materialized. I couldn't see anything better about being 40 or on. And so I was just like, I remember the end of the 30s, and most of the people that I was working with and playing and touring with were still in their late 20s. So it felt like I was really kind of failing at this whole life thing, because people of my own age seem to have either stopped being musicians and got real jobs, paying jobs, or whatever. And I remember that was probably the hardest time. I didn't see that, oh, I'm going to get into my 40s and now I'm going to have, starting to get into my second decade or second, third, I don't know, how many years of experience. And that experience is going to equip me to face challenges that I could never have faced before. And I'm going to be able to help people I've never helped before. And I'm going to be able to have a voice and some tools and whatever to bring to different situations that could make it better, not just for me, but for other people. And that was what I'd always aspired to. And it was that late 30s that I think, yeah, that's when I realized, a whole lot. It was a really awkward, the disappointment, the discouragement, defeat. That's kind of what was like raging around me. And it was somewhere in that era that my dad suddenly got sick. He'd never hardly been sick a day in his life. He got sick with one of these weird cancers, and just within a few months he was gone. And I believe it was the last conversation we ever had in the hospital room. His hospital room. And he just said, you know what, Rick, I think anything that you could have chosen to do with your life would have been easier than the path you chose. But I really like the man you become, and I love your partner, and I think you got great kids. So you know what? I think you should just keep doing what you're doing. And that was maybe possibly the last thing my dad ever said to me. And it was moving into the 40s when I started realizing, like, this whole notion of, laying it on the line, it doesn't just happen once, it happens every day. You get up and you choose to lay it on the line. And what I've learned my own self, as I've talked to peers and people around my age as I get older and older, is now I start seeing not the starving artist, but the starving spirit, the starving mind, the starving soul of people who are my age or a bit older who have put off this process of laying it on the line. And they've long since given up on whatever it was that really gave them life and brought them life and excitement and got them out of bed in the morning. And now they're talking about, retiring. And a lot of them don't know to do what, to go where, to start living a life that they've avoided living because they didn't want to be a starving artist. I don't know, man. I'm just asking questions. I mean, in my humble opinion, this has to be one of the biggest dangers of living online the way we do, because from the moment we get up, we're in this, it's about consuming, never creating. It's about ingesting the ingredients of a unfulfilled and ungrateful life filled increasingly with rage and dissatisfaction and add to whatever you want, political posturing and posting and whatever. I think that's one of the things, to start every single day, not focused on yourself and what it is that you're bringing to this world, but like going, well, what's happening in the world now? And it's like, well, who gives a rip, man? What's happening in your world? What are you creating? What are you making? Where and how are you laying your heart, soul, and mind on the line and experiencing the joy and the thrill and the fear and the panic and everything else that comes from going for it? This process of working on this documentary and meeting these different athletes and talking to them, it's kind of like time travel a little bit to go back. They're probably 20 years younger than me. So it's to hear them in a younger phase of life, approaching it and maybe not even necessarily being aware of all of the opportunities, of all of the personal growth, of all of the relational experiences that are happening, that are expanding their world. They're just kind of caught up in like, got this tournament, or I'm trying out for this team, or we're going to try to go for this. And I love it. And a couple weeks ago, I got to go to the Arctic. I get to go up to the Arctic and Northern Canada every year, probably a couple times a year, and have for over a decade. And I've never really been able to share that. One trip years ago, I was able to take my daughter, and she was doing a clinic. She had something called extreme martial arts. And we went to this little indigenous community, and she worked with all of the students throughout the week, teaching them this extreme martial arts. And it was really, really cool. She's the only one in my family I've been able to have this opportunity, and that was 5 years ago. So here we had this opportunity a few weeks ago for my son and my daughter and I to go to the north so that they could do these dodgeball clinics in these communities all over the north, because the competitive dodgeball doesn't exist up there like that. So, this documentary that I'm working on now, it's kind of consuming my mind, and it's causing me to lay myself on the line in ways that I haven't before. So, back in the fall, I was in a school, walked into the staff room, and the principal says, "Hey, Rick, here's this guy from the government, and he does these youth tours." And I was like, "Oh, do you remember so-and-so?" And he said, yeah, that was the person who had my job before me. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I worked with her a couple times, and we did these different kinds of tours." And so we exchanged contact information. And when I followed up, I was like, I could do what I do with you. And I said, full disclosure, they're my kids, but my kids play this competitive dodgeball, and they're both like on Team Canada, and they're going to be playing at Worlds, and they're at Nationals, and blah, blah, blah. We could come to the north, and they could run dodgeball clinics and teach competitive dodgeball across the north. Hopefully this would lead, maybe this would be the seeds that they could sow that would become, eventually lead to teams from the north, going to these different tournaments and playing at nationals and representing that region of the country. And I said, "No, I'll come along and I'll film everything, and I'll make these promotional videos. So it'll be like communities can see how to play it, and they can be inspired, and the kids can look epic." And so that's what we did. So I find myself putting, this new kind of extension or idea that's come to me. I'm just like, oh my God, I could take my experience in making videos and being kind of a one-man producer with all of the cameras and the equipment and the mics and everything else, and be able to tell the story. And we did, and we went, and we had this incredible time. And it kind of has taken me back to this opportunity where it's like, my kids love playing dodgeball, and they're good at playing dodgeball, but that doesn't necessarily mean how to like run a clinic with 50 to 70 kids from God knows what, 12 years old up to 20 or 22, like quite and they just knocked it out of the park, in part because they were just like, they went for it. And when you put yourself into a situation like that, there is no like, I'm not sure I'm ready for this. It's like, well, here's 50 kids and they're ready to go. So start like explaining the sport and just going for it. And when you do, and they just shared what they were passionate about, and they were really encouraging, and it was so awesome. It was so awesome. And it reminded me about that age. I remember seeing images of war-affected children in refugee camps in Macedonia. They were from Kosovo. It was like the whole war was going on. NATO was bombing Serbia. It was this whole thing going on in the Balkan region. And I believed, watching these images on the TV, I believed I could do something to make it better. I believed so strongly in my ability to contribute in some way to make that corner of the world better that I wrote a proposal and submitted it to the Canadian Foreign Affairs Department, and I got them to pay my entire band and a little film crew to come along and document the whole thing. We did it. And we did it because I believed, hey, whatever I've got, whatever I'm doing here makes a difference, not just for me, but for those people around me. It was years later, I remember getting a call from a principal up north. This is probably one of the very first steps that, really started leading me up there. It was a small indigenous school that I'd been to with my artist collective, Tribe of One, that I was touring with. And we'd been there before as a big group. And the principal said, hey, could you come on your own? And would you be able to work with, a handful of students in the school? I'm like, yeah, sure. And I did. And it worked. And it worked so well. I've gone back to that school every year for over a decade and made relationships with these kids who are now, many of them are long gone and into adult lives of their own. And if I think about it from war affected, countries to home groups, like house concerts that I did for years. And I would go to the most random out of way places. The journey that I've taken, that's taken me literally around the world a few times to so many different countries, just putting it myself out there. Hey, and sometimes it's just simple. I remember once, one time we sold our house so that we could spend a year traveling around the world with our kids. That was another moment of laying it on the line. I knew right from the get-go, it's like, this is pretty incredible. I want to document this. I want to write a book about it. I've never really written a short story more than 2 pages long. I don't know why I thought I could write a book, but I just did, laid it on the line, wrote a book. Every CD I've ever done, it's been the same thing. Man, I had these songs. Sometimes I get to go into a studio and work with amazing musicians and award-winning, really acclaimed musicians that really intimidate me. And sometimes the money doesn't come through. You apply to all the grants, you apply for everything, nothing comes through. Everybody heads off on their own tour. And I remember one album, I was just left by myself in my basement in Winnipeg. That happens a lot here, living in the Lekwungen territory. Just I don't really know anybody in this city. And so if I want to record something, it comes down to me taking what I've got in this room, in this 132-year-old house that has more creaky bones than any elderly person in any home in this city. And finding a way to lay it on the line, to record a song, to sing my guts out, to play my heart out, to do the best I can, to surround myself with people who are doing the same. And I think it is this pursuit of living a life where I'm living life on the line that causes me to find it so weird. I have to tell you, I'm just going to collect my thoughts for 1 second. I'm going to tell you about a night I had last year that still weirds me out. Okay, so nothing wrong with being nostalgic. I'm not. I know a lot of people are, and I get it. But if I'm going to get together with old friends, people that I used to know or used to work with or tour with, whatever, I am mostly interested in what are you doing now? What are you creating now? And I want to talk about what I'm creating now, what I'm working on now. I don't really ever get together with old friends because I want to talk about the old days, the good old days, right? So I had an opportunity to get together with some friends from many years ago. And it kind of went off the rails almost right off the bat because everybody started talking about these old times, the good old days, except it wasn't the good old days. They were talking about the bad old days. They were talking about those things. When I started this podcast, it was about the disappointments and discouragements and defeats that we've all had. Well, to me, There's nothing really surprising about that. The only cool thing about talking about that is like what you've learned from it or how it's inspired you or changed your, perspective or something. But to just be now 2 decades older and talking about that same defeat or discouragement or disappointment with no greater sense of awareness, self-awareness, or insight, just simply repeating the activities and the things that happen. And he said this, and he said that, and she said this, and it was like terrible, and whatever. And it's like, I was kind of just, and it kind of went around the room. There was a bunch of these friends, and it was just kind of like it snowballed out of, and I love these friends. I was just like, I couldn't care less. Like, I care about my friends, but you're talking about something that happened 20 years ago when we were all in our late 20s or early 30s, when we didn't know anything, including the people that have disappointed and discouraged and defeated you in your story. And I'm like, they didn't know anything either. And who knows? And who are they that they're still living rent free in your life, like in your head, like causing you this amount of like despair and discouragement? And it's like your youth was stolen from you and your dreams were stolen from you. And it's like, no, they weren't. Life happened to you. That's what life is about. It's like, it's kind of like that. And so, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but as it went around the room and it was like this friend and that friend and that friend, and I was like, I just want to get out of this room. I just found it so weird. And then they all left. And I'm by myself, and I just kind of sat there looking out the window. Now it's very, very late at night, and I'm just kind of looking out the window at the streetlights of this city, and I'm wondering why. I was defeated and discouraged and full of despair every bit as much as they were back in those days. At least, if not more so. And I'm like, so why? Why do I roll into this city and back into this room with these friends only to find myself like an alien, like I don't get it anymore? And all I could come up with, and I don't know if you've ever had an experience like this, and on either side, feeling like me or feeling like them, I'm not sure. The only conclusion I could come to as I sat there in the dark looking out over the city was because I didn't stay there. I refused to let all those discouragements ultimately discourage me. I refused to let those defeats defeat me ultimately. To give into the despair. If anything, I would use the despair and the discouragement and the defeat to write another song or create another story or another chapter in my story and find a way to share that. And I remember going and, I had an actual career. For a couple of years, I pretty much didn't play anything bigger than a house concert, like literally playing in people's backyards and their living rooms. And when I look back into it, I remember one of the people I toured with, he was a fellow singer-songwriter, and we were sharing the night. And he just said, Rick, when I do shows on my own, I'm playing like 17 to 20 songs a night. I play with you, and he's like, we're playing like maybe 11 or 12. Because you're talking so much. And I was like, I thought he was like really criticizing me, like, oh my God, I talk too much. And he's like, no, but everybody in the room is as interested in what you're talking about and the stories that you're telling as they are the songs that we're singing. I've just never toured with anybody like this. And I realized looking back on it, it's like, that's the stories I was sharing were the ones where I was confused and lonely and frustrated and angry, and what I was doing about it and thinking about it, and not letting it ultimately define who I was, but to define the process and the journey that I was on. And by the way, here's this angry song as I, tried to process this night, or here's this really sad song when I was like super depressed. And the people in those rooms and those backyards were loving the stories and the songs because they shared that journey. They shared the human experience that is full of defeat and discouragement and despair. And I think there's something, you don't have to have the answers to any of it. None of us do, but just sharing that journey and that process lets other people know, hey, I'm not alone in this. And when I see these young athletes right now that I'm working with telling their story, when I see them laying it all on the line and absolutely going for it, and their bodies are hurting, and they just got their ass kicked in the last match, and now they have to step right onto the court and play this next team. And if they lose to this team, now they're out. And so it's like, you've got to just like mentally get in the game, stand shoulder to shoulder with your friends and give it everything you've got. And it's kind of a metaphor for life, but it's also kind of just life. And I love it. And I've just been thinking of this. It keeps coming up when I keep running into different friends and people. And there was another whole kind of professional experience that I found myself in recently, where people were, again, just focused on what you couldn't do and what couldn't be done and what probably, and I hate that, you provide a solution to a problem and somebody's like, that probably wouldn't work. It's like, really? Probably why? Probably because you don't have the faith, or you don't have the guts, or you don't have the courage to get on the line and try. And one of the things that I've gotten to this point in my life, I love finding those people who will. And it's like, if you don't want to, get out of the way. Let somebody get in there. If you're in a job, if you're in a company, if you're in a community, and somebody's like, hey, here's a problem, here's a situation, and you do not want to do what it takes to try to find that situation, I don't know why it's so hard for some people to just say, hey, you know what? That's a great idea. Why don't you try that? Why don't you try that? So this isn't about like me accusing anybody. That's like, as always, I'm trying not to say anybody's names or any company names or any divulging of any personal or professional information, because the story ultimately is mine. Being creative, I know it's what I say every episode, but it's a mindset. It is. It's a lifestyle. It absolutely is. And it's a lifestyle in my own humble experience that produces an energy. And that energy empowers resiliency and the confidence to face the challenges that life throws at us. And it's that process of constantly laying it on the line day after day that creates momentum. And it's that momentum, or unfortunately the lack of it, that I want to share through these episodes, because I know wherever you are, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, we share this experience. And I don't want anybody out there that I meet or that might be listening to go, you know what? I don't have what it takes. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. And you might just be scared, and you might be afraid of what might happen. You might really, really be dreading ever going through what you went through 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. But you can do it. And if you try, that's life. And it will be amazing. There. haven't done one of these for so long. I was like traveling and touring and I've been making all this stuff and this documentary. Good Lord. I really want to do this documentary. I am really doing it. And what was so hilarious, I've been talking to funders. I've been talking to different art councils and people to try to find some money. But I realized, you know what's great about it? There was probably a few decades ago that I would be approaching a funder like an art council and saying like, if you fund this, I'll be able to do it. If you don't fund me, I won't be able to do it. And now I realize, oh, I'm doing it and I'll do it one way or the other. So if I don't get any money, it'll be me with the equipment that I have in my camera bag right now. It will be me sitting here for months by myself, editing this story together the best I can. If I get some money, well, then I'm going to be able to work with some amazing people and maybe have some gear that I don't have right now to help tell a better story. But ultimately, one way or the other, I'm telling this story because it's amazing. So yeah, on the line. It's not something it's not just a clever, do you know how I got the, do you know how I got the idea? I really had to pay a price to get the idea for the name. If you follow me on Instagram or anywhere else, I did post this little video, but I was filming at the provincials in British Columbia, the dodgeball provincials, like a month or two ago. And the courts were so jammed into this gym that I was barely, any of us that were standing on the sidelines, you didn't even have a foot of extra time. So I was literally leaning against the wall. I'm filming, trying to get the wide angle to capture all the action. And some player on this one team lost control of the ball. It absolutely drilled me in the side of the head, knocked me totally on my ass. And so I like fall into the court and stop the game. It was really embarrassing or whatever. And when I get back up and get off the court and lean against the wall, I look down and the guy who's reffing the game, he's like, "It happens." And then yelling to both teams, he's like, "All right, on the line, on the line." And I was like, that's it. When the game of life knocks you on your ass, the only thing you can do is get back up again and get on the line and do it again. And so there's the title for the documentary, and it's such a great tagline for the life I've been living for a while and want to keep living. And so anyways, I hope you enjoyed today's little episode, and feel free to leave a comment or ask a question. And remember, you're capable of infinitely more than you give yourself credit for. So until next time.